I'm gonna come sit over
Just
there.
prepared.
All right, it was only 4 million.
Just prepared. If we're really going for it.
If there were 4 million people that were interested in this discussion, I'd be thrilled. Chances are they're wasting their time doing other things.
Yeah.
So we just saw the movie Homestead, and if you don't know about it, it's in theaters for a short amount of time, and it's a Hollywood movie that depicts a scenario of, it's not totally clearly delineated, a terrorist nuclear attack in LA, and something else happens that makes the power grid all over the East Coast and Texas go down. And so there's basically a billionaire prepper mansion bunker, and they have they've made arrangements for a loose band but organized military trained security support that comes there. So I thought it would be interesting, and my friend Melissa Norris, who helped advise the movie, asked would be interested to hear the reflections. So we're just going to share some reflections, and yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So my background, I'm a Navy SEAL, and going to certain movies where you have to, I'm sure, the same in everyone's world. But when I see tactics, if it's too bad, I get a little hung up on too bad. It starts to, and it wasn't too bad. It was good. I really appreciated what everyone was doing. You didn't get lost in it, and I also appreciated that. That the movie didn't get too far into that it's a whole tactical mess. There's plenty of fiction books, and process around this that you could just get deep into. It's practically a zombie flick now, and we're just killing all the neighbors. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that it didn't go in that direction. It was like, and it's hard to see who the heroes, the friendlies in the movie are also doing bad things. They stole a car.
Right.
There's moments where you're like, oh yeah, this is real. No one's really right and wrong. It's a messy situation all the way to the end of the movie about what you're trying to do.
I was wondering that about you, thinking if you were going through tactical processes in your mind and watching these guys move around the compound and how they interacted with people, and how that would be to have someone who had special forces training to see something like this, and does it elicit kind of almost like a visceral response in you?
Well, almost the same way you guys when we left, really some grow house. All you need is some grow bags, some LED lights, and a bunch of potatoes from the farmers. It does in a lot of movies, but at first I was like, I didn't, the seal of course was a dirt bag a little bit. Immature dirt bag. Why is the seal got to be the immature dirt bag? But it's a story, and you have to play up all the characters, and then we have to have the brave guy and the leader and the soft wife, and you have to play the key. So he played the character, and if I'm honest, in the SEAL teams, you got a bunch of 22-year-old young punks who are both have a lot of bravado and immaturity, and if they were actually in that situation, you'd probably be a little bit unhinged. So I appreciated that character was there to kind of you're a little worried during the whole movie that whole crew just
snap a little bit, right?
Snap a little bit, and that's part of the tension. So I as far as movies go, I think it went well.
I think it depicted a lot of the real issues that one would face in a scenario like that very well, right? And even the point of the soft wives, our men are going to do their thing, we're going to actually handle something on a different level. I feel like that's often the case where men can go kind of write out the thing and women hold it back a little bit. I struggle with the idea, the concept that this is going to be everyone's perception of this scenario. And that's one of the things I think about media is when it just kind of, I think it's going to hold people's perception of we can grow potatoes, we can live on bread, we can have whatever, a few orchards and drink some wine from last year and we're going to be fine, right? And so there's a part of the unrealisticness that but I really feel like they drew a lot on highways being closed or locked down, stores being looted, all of a sudden human response to stress is start panicking and going against one another right away at the grocery store, and then stealing the car, and then are you a good person even though you're stealing somebody's car? What is your life worth more than others? Brought up a lot of really interesting questions.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing. It's a lot of us can deal with one stressful scenario, but in an instance like this, it cascades. And remember, in the moment with the fueling station, there's a little cardboard sign: gas $25 a gallon, because in an incident like this, also you have currency collapse, and people don't want money.
I didn't catch that.
At some point, there's these subtle things, and also too, the central scene was a 10,000 square foot mansion where they've been preparing with all the money in the world, with root cellars, whole safes, walk-in safes with guns and ammunition, whole storehouses of grain and LED lights for growing, and they're in the mountains of Colorado. And then we took note, because as the drone footage came in, it's beautiful Colorado mountains, all the fall leaf color, and the grapes are still on the vine, there's tomatoes on the vine, it's peak abundance. And they're looking at, how do we feed? I remember they had a chalkboard with how many men, women, and children, and calorie rations and all this stuff, and I think it was about 80 people or something. Feeding 80 people through the winter. And I know from having years of interns that would come here, usually April or May, and that is the time of lowest abundance on the land, because all of your potatoes are sprouted and worn out, your winter squash is all eaten or it's gone bad, and all there is from the garden is greens like kale and maybe some root vegetables like parsnips, carrots, and beets. It's a pretty lean time, and it's really starvation season. So in terms of, even if you have the means of production, gardens and greenhouses, and you're planting seeds, it's a month to radishes, a month to leafy greens, a month and a half to turnips.
I think it's you were saying, like, worried that people will come away from this movie like, oh, I can do it. And I have the same thing. Like, I've done the math, like 3 OPs, 2 people on watch, 6 people, 4-hour shifts, plus someone on the radio, plus those people have to work all day. You're 70 people just to do watch. The gate, they should have, like, there should have been a separation of space, like close the road down. But at the same time, like, in these stories, I don't think we can. I think it's more about just about the story. It's about relationships and people, because if people come in there and think they're going to start a homestead off of, well, they did it this way.
Exactly.
Make sure it's a metal gate with spacing. Like it'll
and the electricity still runs to make it move.
Right? So I think that no one should. You can read as many of those fiction books as possible, plus the nonfiction books, and try to figure it out. And it's still not. I don't know, there's so many holes in it. I mean, you know, just from farming for 27 years or whatever, you're like, no, it's not, you guys were leaving, being like, Colorado Rockies, sunlight, like, this is the worst place to try to figure this out. And so hopefully people don't, internally, yes, someone's going to move to the Rockies after this movie, and have some greenhouses out back, but maybe that's not the best call. So the story-wise, I feel like, you have to break all that away. It was the same, I think, Chris Kyle, American Sniper movie. He was in my sister platoon, and watching that movie, because I was at the beginning of that movie somewhere. But it was like they had to show one side, like he's a cowboy. It's a certain, like, we got to tell a story. You can't tell someone's whole life story. Let's just make him the cowboy that's like this, and we got to speed up a few of the stories, and it's all compressed. And so since that movie, I've sort of like backed off my need for it all to be like
explained.
It's got to be perfect. They missed so many points.
Because it was a personal experience with that guy, or you could have seen yourself in that position?
I think Clint Eastwood, I think he was the director. I think, like, anybody, like, get in his shoes. How am I going to tell not only his book, Chris Kyle's book, but then his life story? And, when you spend time with a guy and you're in that situation, you're like, or you spend time 27 years on a farm, you're like, well, that's not really the way it would go. But if you had 2 hours to tell a story, or an hour and a half, we're gonna have to skip some of the
trials,
the planting, the seeds. At least they did some seed planting in there. So so back to the story, I left wanting more.
Mhm.
You know, that was a nice thing. I left feeling like, oh, I'm kind of glad the hordes didn't come in. That we just, I like post-apocalyptic. I like dystopian. I like for society to break down and for people to tell the story and to figure out how humanity lives. But I also I didn't need it. It was nice to leave and feel like, oh, okay, you know. But I joked with these guys that I said, I thought, you know, the credits, and it's like, oh, the end, and then I was like, they're all dead by March. but guys will say that. But yeah, I felt like, okay, these guys, hope and love and some potatoes. I think hopefully they make it to next summer.
I think the directors really did elicit the emotional battles that would go on in a situation like that pretty well, and I think that the way that the husbands and wives had to come to conflict, and then the wives and children had to, you know, the idea that we're not just going into this and it's going to be groovy because we've got a good family and we're going to make it happen, but the idea that we're going to come to odds, the stress is going to get us through. And one of the things I liked about the head of security and his wife is even when they came to odds and I felt like, oh, someone could get really cranky here, I still saw the overtures of love towards one another, like the good mornings and the connection. And I was like, okay, cool. We're showing on a level where people are working through their interpersonal stuff in a stressful situation. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And too, they analyze that place of like, yeah, it's one thing you've got your training, what you do in a battlefield or some other country, but it's another thing, there's kids running around and they're like my kids or your kids. And I think that like the two female protagonists, this was really kind of the central, you know, turning point of the movie of this, you know, the male protagonist, one guy is like, it's all about our stores. We need our stores to last and doing all the math. And the other guy's like, we have to secure the perimeter at all costs. And then the women are more like, but there's hungry people out at the gate with children.
Yep.
We have enough food to feed them now. And, you know, what was the one saying, like, is this a prison or a fortress? You know, what are we doing here? And I think that's a very real thing. And when we get into this thinking of what would you do in that, is that there is something, and I appreciate they brought faith, you know, and the role that, you know, leaning in towards God, you know, ultimately, and just put it in God's hand. And, you know, we don't know. You could be the smartest about any of these things. And all of us, like, we stand to benefit in any kind of dystopian thing just purely on an ego-stroking thing, because it validates our skill sets as being important, rather than the current paradigm where people that know how to code video games are making six figures and are completely oblivious about things that we know are actually the like spiritually important parts of life, of, you know, our faith, our family, the natural elements and community. And, you know, those kind of things that from our deathbed that we think back like, did I make the right choice? Yeah. And so, you know, it's if you're interested in seeing the movie, we didn't know going into it, but it's going to be a series. Yeah. So in a way, you don't have to answer, you don't have to conclude the story.
Right, exactly.
Because for all of us, the story ends when you die.
Right.
And a movie, we just get a snapshot.
Yeah, and it's still going. I would have watched the next part. Like if I would.
You can tonight. You just have to pay for someone's movie ticket. I think.
I would have binge watched that.
Yeah.
If that thing
you get one more episode.
If that thing came back on today, I would have stayed. I was like, oh, I'm stuck.
Yeah. I know, no spoilers here.
I'm stuck.
But there were a lot of things that as we were leaving, talking about like, oh, if this would have happened, what would they have done? And we'll leave that just because I'm sure they'll cover all those things in the preceding episodes. But, you know, just as a point of context, we all live in a dead-end valley in an area where there's been a back to the land movement for 50 years, 50 years, and lots of people with solar panels, gravity flow water, composting toilets. We're not going to tell you
We're not telling you where it is, though.
But, you know, there's a lot of places like this where there's a lot of people that it's not about getting ready for some coming disaster scenario. No. It's more about getting alignment with what are my values.
Yes.
And so I hope that they begin to explore that a little bit more, and that any other, you know, filmmakers, if you're out there, consider that that's for some people, it's just the right way to live. And when you think about it, if we just go back 80, 90 years, everybody lived off the land and hunted and fished and grew a garden and canned and shared with their neighbors, and knew how to do some basic maintenance of the tools and the infrastructure
Yes.
that you need to live in. That's one thing I think my biggest critique is the message I think it sends to the uneducated public out there is that it's money will just fix this.
Yes.
You could just buy, hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars of greenhouses, LED lights, ammo, guns. I did like the way they used the electric dirt bikes, heavy-duty dirt bikes for security patrol.
Oh, mountain bikes.
Instead of I always think just like a dual sport motorbike.
It's quiet.
It's quiet. Yeah. Good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked the movie. It was a good
Yeah.
start to the series for sure. Definitely hooked me.
Yeah.
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 Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think people. We looked around that movie. We saw a bunch of mostly older men, and then some older women as well. It speaks to this, like, things are going bad, and people who are into that storyline. And I think everybody at some level that I speak to has. That's not true. Not everybody. Some people are just like, I don't want. There's nothing I can do if the world goes to shit. But yeah, it's interesting to see who is looking for it, and if everyone I know or people watching this video are looking for some people are looking, even if it's just like a little bit of preparedness in their home, or resilient lifestyle, or move to a better place. And it's also why I moved up to be closer to you guys, and as you were saying, it's more about a fully resilient community. So instead of it just being that compound, it's actually this whole valley comes together in rough times and is there to feed each other and help each other. And we've got 3 bridges that, that you could close down on the way here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of what it really takes for humans to overcome calamitous situations is going to be really well explored through this. Of course, it's going to be sensationalized. I think it's great to as a starting point for people to start the conversation.
Yeah.
I think I'll leave it there. It's a good starting point for the conversation. I do like again how they just really brought that contrast of masculine, feminine, get it done, prepare it, or do we what she said was, yes, we'll be alive, but is it a life worth living? Right? I'm paraphrasing that, but that really touched me. I was like, yeah, for real. It's like, are we going to feed people, or are we going to shoot them down? And that was her choice. And we do have these choices every day, right? Like, are we going to knock people down, or are we going to lift them up? So I think there's a lot of depth to it, and excited to go on the journey.
Yeah. And that's, I think, in summation, just the whole notion of, at one point they're hoping FEMA will come and save the day. And I know, talking to a few friends that just went through, the flooding near Asheville, North Carolina, and when they had to flee and go be in a hotel, they had a hard time finding empty hotel rooms because it was all occupied by Red Cross and FEMA that weren't helping. So they're actually in the way. So I think, ultimately, spiritually, it's good to learn how to look to within yourself, to be able to rely on yourself and have the skills and the moral fortitude to know that you'll do the right thing when the occasion arises.
And I think the preparedness idea is really inspiring, because obviously the man had put a lot of thought into this process, right? Yet you can't think of all of it. Okay?
Yeah.
And the idea of, like, yeah, you want to go to a hotel, but how are we preparing in our communities? And you helped me with this last year, but we won't go into that. But just this idea of how are we not just helping ourselves, but the extended community, right? Because if everyone's taken care of, then no one's going to be showing up at the gate meeting, because everyone's going to be supported to do that.
And everybody that did show up that knew where this place was had what? Remember? A go bag.
Yes.
Everybody was ready, even the LA suburban types. And that's, I think, just so what can you do? And that's just one last closing thought I have is, when we were kids, we did earthquake drills, fire drills, nuclear fallout drills, child of the 80s. why don't we do this as adults?
Mhm.
Why do we wait for disaster to strike to get ready?
Mhm.
And really, this should just be part of, as men,
Mhm.
of being providers and thinking of like, if that happened, it might be helpful to have
Yeah.
some extra of this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, cool. All right, thanks, brothers.
Yeah, man.
Thanks.